So hello and welcome. I won't say good evening because Eric, our special guest speaker, is in the States. So I know it's morning and we have people from all over the world who will be joining us for this exciting masterclass tonight on the 7 keys to conflict resolution. So I'm Dawn Campbell. I'm your host at the IAPC&M, and I'd like to introduce Eric to you properly. Eric is the amazingly talented, hardworking, generous master coach to the creatives. He's also the author of must be nearly 60 books now, with the latest one
getting
being
on to
The
that,
Coach's
yes.
Way. Yeah, The Coach's Way, which I was very honored to write the foreword for. And I think it's going to be one of those classics that stay around for a long time. So people like you, Julia, who you're training the next generation of coaches, you'll want them to read this book. It's going to be a classic. So I asked Eric some time ago to perhaps do a masterclass for us on conflict. I'm conflict averse. And at the time we were approaching Christmas, and I know how people's expectations of the perfect festive family break can often go awry, and they're dealing with the fallout in January/February, which is often quite a very depressing time. So I asked Eric if he would talk to us about how to manage conflict, both personally and professionally. And as a psychotherapist and somebody who writes about this topic a lot, he was the perfect person to share these tips with us. So let's sit up, take copious notes, and hand over to you now, Eric, please.
Hopefully folks can get a PDF of this, Dawn, because I may go through some of these slides a little quickly. Welcome, everybody. Great to be with you. Let me start with a headline or a distinction. So the conflict resolution literature and the mediation literature makes a certain supposition. It presumes that two people or two groups are actually trying to get to yes, actually want to get somewhere. That's a big assumption, because another set of literatures, the authoritarian personality literature and similar literatures, reminds us that there are people out there, maybe as many as 25% of the population, in some pundits say, who are authoritarian by nature and aren't trying to get to yes. They're wanting to win, or they're trying to bully us, or something else is going on different from what I would call good faith negotiations. So that's one of the headlines of this little chat, is to think about what a person can do, what you can do, what a client can do, when the other person isn't necessarily going to meet you halfway, isn't negotiating in good faith. So let me begin. I have to get rid of this thing on top. Let's see, how do I do that? Whoop. So some people do thrive on conflict. We know that. Here in the States, we have zillions of politicians thriving on conflict. But most of the rest of us don't really love it. What kinds of conflicts are we talking about? What do we see in session? What do we see in our own lives? I see a lot of siblings quarreling about one thing or another. That kind of surprised me. I did a book called, what was the name of it? Something about families and difficulty. And one of the things I learned in working on that book were how many sibling disputes were out there, including real alienation and estrangement among siblings. Nowadays, with so much information on the internet and with people being able to learn so much about their own ailments, there are often conflicts between your client and her doctor or doctors about a diagnosis, especially those hard to fathom ailments where a diagnosis is difficult, those digestive ailments, those energy ailments. So those conflicts go on. Then there are the things that seem trivial, that seem only irritating, like a couple of neighbors ending up in conflict over a barking dog, but we understand how even a small event, a small something, can provoke large difficulties. So not to go through the whole list, the one I want to focus on, though, is the one about a parent and her child's school, because this is one of my special areas of interest, that is the areas called critical psychology or critical psychiatry or anti-psychiatry. It's all the same branch with different names. And those are groups of people who disagree with the current mental disorder diagnosing and treating model, believe that the DSM and the ICD do not really diagnose, but only label, and that this is especially true when it comes to kids receiving most typically an ADHD diagnosis or something like that, and the school demanding that the parent accept the diagnosis and put the child on not just one nowadays, but typically multiple psychiatric meds. This is going on in millions of households. So that conflict between a parent and her child's school, or between a parent and a psychologist, or between a parent and a school counselor, I think that's one of the conflicts that we're looking at nowadays. And it's one of the ones I find most poignant and really difficult for parents. Hard for them not to acquiesce, especially if the threat is that their child is going to be thrown out of the school. So these are some of the sorts of conflicts that we experience and that our clients experience. Here are some headlines. Conflict is not unusual. It's a feature of our species. We should not be surprised if our client is in conflict or if we end up in conflict with someone. It happens. Many conflicts are unavoidable. If you're a Ukrainian, it's really hard to avoid that conflict. Many conflicts are just flat out unavoidable. Conflicts are they're never abstract ideas. They involve personalities, and they're always contextual and situational. A place where you might not get into conflict with a person one time, you do because you finally want to take a stand, or you finally want to speak up for yourself. So a thing that was not a conflict previously because you acquiesced now becomes a conflict because you've changed your mind about how you want to operate. And then I think we each do have a particular default style when it comes to conflict. Some people want to instigate them. Many of us, I think, want to flee conflict or appease the other person while sort of fleeing. One of the things I think that we try to help clients achieve is that ability to stand their ground in conflict. It isn't that fleeing might not be appropriate sometimes, and we'll get to that in a moment, or that even appeasing might not be appropriate sometimes. But most typically what our client is actually wanting is to find her way to stand her ground. And I do think, the last one is, I do think we each have our particular tolerance level for conflict. Many sensitive, smart people have a low tolerance level for conflict. I think partially, this is my opinion, I think partially because we just want to get on with life. We have our life purposes to lead, and we don't want to get embroiled in conflicts that we understand we can't win, or that are really relatively minor. That is, I think what we're doing is we're being smart often when we avoid conflict. We're not just fleeing it or being weak, but we're making a decision to live our other life purposes and not get embroiled here. So as I say, there are two completely different literatures, really. There's the general conflict resolution literature or mediation literature that acts as if two people or two groups are trying to get somewhere together, that they're trying to resolve the conflict. When that's actually the case, when the two people are trying to resolve the conflict, then the tactics that the conflict resolution literature suggests make sense. And these are some of those tactics. Welcome healthy disagreement, respect boundaries, carefully listen, calmly discuss. We understand where this is coming from. These are two reasonable people or two reasonable groups operating in good faith. And these are perfectly sensible tactics or guidelines when that's the case. Of more interest to me are those cases where that isn't the case, where people are not acting in good faith. I've done whole books on authoritarians in the family, on authoritarian personality. I understand the extent to which virtually everyone has to deal with authoritarians sometimes, whether in the workplace or in the family, whether it's an authoritarian father or mother or sibling, or even an authoritarian child can go that way. So when that's the case, then we have to look at matters differently. Those getting to yes tactics don't quite work. So I think for all conflicts, including those with folks who are not operating in good faith, so I think these 7 keys work for all conflicts, not just the good faith conflicts, but also those conflicts when we're dealing with somebody who's not okay. First key is to get smart about what's going on. Is this a person who could get to yes or not? And if not, what should we do about that? How can we deal with that? We'll go through each one of these in some detail, so I'm just going to give you the headline here. Know your basic tactics, know what you intend to do. Get ahead of unnecessary conflicts. We can feel how some conflicts are coming. And if we say the next thing, if we do the next thing, then the conflict will arrive. And we can forestall it by being smart. Another key is to, since we're dealing with difficult individuals, with difficult personalities we can't change or control or even much influence often, then our number one tactic is to deal with the problem, not the individual. And we'll get there in a minute as to what I mean. Once you've figured out what's going on and have identified the problem and know your basic tactics, then you want to form intentions that you're going to act on. We don't want ourselves or our clients to just swirl in this malaise, to just have these thoughts go round and round and round about the conflict. We want them to make a decision about what they intend to do, to then align their thoughts with that intention, and then to act on that intention. I think these are sort of straightforward coaching hopes for clients, that they go do something, that they learn something and then go do something useful. So in terms of getting smart about conflicts, number one is what I've been saying a few times over, and that is this one of those conflicts that is really about two people having some misunderstanding or some small disagreement, and they can get to yes fairly easily? Or are we dealing with somebody who perhaps wants the conflict or just can't be changed, just prefers winning and inflicting punishment to getting to yes? I think we want to be careful to and come to understand our own shadows, where maybe we enjoy certain conflicts, even if we're conflict averse. Even if we're conflict averse, we may secretly enjoy certain kinds of conflicts. And we want to get smart about that, get those out in the open so that we don't enter into those conflicts unconsciously. Number 3 is really important for coaches, I think. I think how we say things in session, how we speak to clients is incredibly important. and makes the difference between a conflict arising between you and your client or not. So if you say to a client, you never would, but let's say you said to a client, think you ought to say X to your brother this week. You know that may well not work, that may feel too pushy and cause a little rupture or a large rupture between you and your client. Whereas if you were to say, I wonder if you might like to try saying X to your brother this week, comes from a different place in you and is received in a different place by your client. So we can forestall many conflicts between ourselves and our clients by being careful, by being circumspect, by being careful about how we use language. And then conflict produces emotional upsetness. We understand that. That means we'll have to deal with that. As smart as we may be about the conflict, as wise as we may be, as strong as we may be, we're still going to get upset. And you want your plan, your strategies for dealing with that upsetness. And by plan, by tactics, I mean something as simple as temporizing. That is, not hitting reply to an email when you're emotionally upset, but waiting till the morning. We all know what it's like to send that email and wish we could take it back the second we sent it. So that amounts to a part of a tactic for dealing with the emotional upsetness is to, in my metaphor, walk around the lake before replying to something that has just upset us. Number two, what are your basic tactics for dealing with conflicts? What are they going to be? They don't have to be these, but you want to know what yours are going to be, what your basic tactics might be. I think this is a logical and sensible plan, basic tactics. Number one, don't create unnecessary conflicts. When a conflict occurs, try to understand what it signifies, because part of the conflict may be in you, about you. I work with creative performing artists all the time, and a typical conflict is between a writer and her editor about her current book. And so the conflict may be that the editor wants a chapter taken out. And we may fight for that chapter unless we've thought it through and understand that that chapter need never have been there. That is, we want to understand what's really going on here from our point of view and from our editor's point of view, and understand that this may not be a conflict we want to fight over because maybe that chapter never should have been there to begin with. Number three, if it is a good faith conflict, then we can use all of those great tips that I showed you earlier, and that, if you get the PDF and are interested in looking at them again, are sensible tactics. But if it's not a good faith conflict, if it's a personality-driven conflict, then you want to weigh your options. In working with survivors of authoritarian interactions, in having people complete, which I've done years ago, many authoritarian wound questionnaires. I had folks respond to an authoritarian wound questionnaire. In understanding what folks who are dealing with authoritarians learned from that experience as to what works, the number one thing that worked for them, sometimes only the only thing that worked for them to deal with an authoritarian conflict, was to get the heck out of there. Was to get 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. To put literal distance between the person and his father or his mother or his sister. That's what I mean about weigh your options. You may want to stay in town for all sorts of reasons, in which case you'll be in proximity to the person you're in conflict with, or you might change your life around completely and make a big move because that feels not just safe, but maybe saves your life. And then whatever you decide is your best course of action, and this is where, coaching differs from therapy a lot. Once you decide what's your best course of action, then you want to do things. Coaches press their clients, I press my clients to do the things that align with what they've learned, align with their insights. Therapy does not typically do that kind of pressing, just notes that an insight has occurred, but doesn't necessarily follow up that insight with, what do you want to do? And let's make sure you do it. So with regard to avoiding unnecessary conflicts, you want to think through if an upcoming conflict or a precipitating conflict is worth your time and energy. If you want to get involved with it, you may. As I say, some conflicts are necessary because it's your ethical duty to do something. And so you must enter into that conflict. So here are a couple that I've set up here as the kinds of conflicts that you would want to think through as to whether you would want to get embroiled in them or not. This first one is coming up a lot with people aging, with folks in the middle between their young children and their aging folks and all of the things that come with aging. This conflict is coming up a lot. When to stop driving. The second one I see all the time in my work with creative and performing artists, that is, my peeps typically can't earn a living from their art, feel bad about not contributing enough to the family income, and don't really want to announce that they're doing some more art. Sort of want to keep that a secret because they don't want to enter into that conflict between them and their mate about contributing more to the family income, to doing something more reasonable, more useful for the family. As I say, one of the most important things with respect to conflict resolution for all conflicts, not just the good faith ones, but especially for the personality-driven ones, is to identify what the problem is exactly and work on the problem, not try to change the individual. So I think this is a good typical example of how that might work. If you and your brother are having this disagreement, this conflict about a jointly inherited house, you've probably had other conflicts before. This is probably one in a string of conflicts, and you know how he operates and he knows how you operate. You kind of can predict what's going to happen, how he's going to dig his heels into the ground, etc. You can probably predict that. You ought to know that you're not going to change him today over this conflict. He's not going to be a different person today by virtue of anything you might try. So the goal here is to focus on the problem, which is the house, dealing with the house. Once you focus on that and try to let go of all of the stewing emotions in you about why isn't your brother this, or why isn't your brother that, or why do you have to do this all the time, et cetera, rather than focusing on those thoughts that aren't serving you and those feelings that aren't feeling good, try to create a plan that solves the problem. And the first part of this plan is straightforward. Get the house appraised. That's straightforward. The second one's a little interesting. And it's you a little bit capitulating, or it's you making a decision that it's not worth it to you to get embroiled in this conflict for the next 6 months or 2 years. So you're going to stretch a little and make a little bit better offer than he might expect, or than that you even sort of have to make. This is you making a decision about what gets you out of the conflict in the best way possible. And I think the third is interesting too. We often think that it's our job to do the fighting, that it's a place of responsibility to do the fighting, but that's not always the case, that's the most sensible approach. Because we may have long-standing and long-simmering dynamics with a given person, such that somebody else might do a much better job of getting this conflict averted or ended. I'm big on inviting clients to use this intend language. I think it's useful and powerful. And I invite clients to form intentions, to know what they intend to do. Just letting these intentions sit there. And then once you've formed, or once a client has helped, once you've helped a client form an intention, or once you've formed an intention, it's very important that you align your thoughts with those intentions. Because you know what happens within you and with clients. They form an intention, and then almost instantly they say something or think something that diffuses that intention. Typically because the intention is just a little bit or a lot scary. The intention actually feels risky. Feels risky to talk to your mother or your father or your sister or your boss or your this or your that. So while it's lovely to say the intention out loud, we can expect that the next thing going on in our client's mind is backing off, backing away from the intention. And so a client names an intention. The next thing you might want to say is, giving her a moment to think, what just came up for you? You just formed a wonderful intention. Love it. Great intention. Now, what just came up for you? Well, I don't think I can talk to John this week because I'm very busy and he's very busy and we're all very busy. And then you get to say, you know, I wonder if that's a thought that serves you, that you're too busy to be in touch with John. What do you think about that? And by spending time in exactly that place of what your client is thinking after she's formed an intention, by staying in that space, in that place, you get to hear how she forms intentions and then lets them go. Whether that intention is to finish her novel this month, or take away her mother's car keys, or tell her husband to stop wandering through her studio, or whatever it is, whatever that intention is. And in conjunction with this, I will invite clients to form thoughts that are 7 words or fewer in length. Yes, that's an arbitrary number, but there's kind of a point to it, because most things that need to be thought or said with strength don't take more words than that. When we use more words than that, what's happening typically is that we're half apologizing, we're half letting go of the intention. So what does a strong cognition sound like? Please stop doing that. Just going to pause, because the second you add 17 more words to that, you've diffused that somehow. You've weakened that. If you say, please stop doing that because it really makes me love this, and I really did, please stop doing that. Now, that's going to feel risky. Your clients may have never said anything in those few words before in their lives. This is a lovely place to practice and rehearse. And if you're like me, you want clients to do things. If a goal of therapy is insight, a goal of coaching is insight followed by work. We want our clients to work. We want them to get better. We want them to change. We want them to do the things they want to do. We want them to realize their dreams and aspirations and hopes. We want all of that to happen, and action is required for all of that. And if you're like me, you would monitor the extent to which your clients are taking action. I do not find it burdensome to have clients check in with me regularly via email with a quick check-in, to which I'll typically respond, great or terrific, no more than that. I don't find that burdensome. But I do want to make sure that they're doing what they intend to do, or what they said they will have done. So let's say a typical client of mine, a writer, hasn't been working on her novel for a year. Now we finally got agreement that despite her busy life, she will, each day when she first awakens, get right to her writing for 15 minutes. That's our deal. That's our agreement. That's her homework, and that's our deal. I will ask her if she's willing. I'll say, if you're willing, will you just drop me an email after you get to your writing for 15 minutes? Just drop me an email and say I wrote. I'd love to hear that. And this is important, I think, and Jane, if you happen not to have written, what I'd like you to do is drop me an email and say, I didn't write today, but I will tomorrow. Or I didn't write today, but I will later today. That is, I don't want her to not check in because she didn't do X. I want to give her a lot of permission to forgive herself and explain, that's not the right word, and announce that she is getting back on the horse. I think this is very important. We're not on conflict resolution this second. We're slightly in a different place, but let me just make this point. In working with clients, I find it very important to sell them on the idea of daily practice, that whatever is important to them, they do in a daily way. Because if they try to do it every third day or every ninth day, what happens is that they lose weeks and months and years of their life. 6 months go by and they didn't work on their novel. The second 3 days go by, 6 months vanish. That's what happens all the time. So I sell and oversell daily practice. I have a book on it, The Power of Daily Practice. I think there are elements of practice and all kinds of interesting varieties of practice, and obviously some challenges to daily practice. All of that's true. But I think it's so valuable a commodity to sell to clients that I think it's worth adding to your repertoire, to announce, to alert them to the fact that if they do something in a daily way, that's the best way to get anything done, whether it's a health practice, a recovery practice, a creativity practice. Anything can be framed as a daily practice. Let me see where we are. So just some last thoughts before we get to questions. I hope there are some questions or thoughts or comments. There are many conflicts we must enter into. That means you need to know your tactics for dealing with conflicts that are coming, because some not only are coming, but you may be inviting them because they're just necessary in your life. You actually have to stand up to someone, even though that's going to provoke a conflict. And just as a last point, many conflicts are made larger by our sort of natural desire to be dramatic, to over-dramatize. Sometimes we're a little bored in life and we want to create dramas for their excitement value, for their adrenaline value. It doesn't tend to work very well. So we want to be careful to keep conflicts at the size they actually are and not over-dramatize them or make them into mountains when they are only molehills. That may be a stopping place. Let me see. Yes, it is. So
Well
I
done,
welcome any
Eric.
thoughts, questions, anything you like.
Thank you. Well, fabulous timing. You've done really, really well, because normally our sessions do overrun and nobody will let you get off the masterclass, but you timed that to perfection. Well done. And I'm glad, as a fellow coach, that you reiterated the point about accountability and also intention, because life does get in the way sometimes. So we don't want any of our clients to be feeling anxious or putting undue pressure on themselves. So if they just check in and say, I didn't do it today, be kind to myself, but I will do it tomorrow, they're back on track. I think that's an important distinction, so thank you for that. So lots to digest there, lots of thoughts. Our minds are probably in a spin in terms of the various conflicts that we experience in our personal and professional lives. Let's open the floor up. You can ask questions in the chat box or just raise your hand, whichever you feel most comfortable with. And I think, Teresa, you're going first, and then Carol, please.
Yeah, thank you. I made lots of notes. So one of the things I always said is, because I grew up with lots of arguments, and I don't have arguments with my kids, but I never thought we still have conflict. And I think my one point I took away is that conflicts are inevitable, but arguments are not, because we don't shout at each other. We really look at like, oh, we just don't agree with something. And it's really scary how the example of the dad is just what I went through with my brother and my dad. I wanted to gift my mum a mobile phone, and I thought my brother might want to give some money towards to it, and it got so complicated. And I just emailed him very kindly, you know what, I decided I'll buy the mobile phone myself. And what was really good to see that sometimes not doing something is not, it doesn't mean I'm running away. I just decided there's too much potential to get into an argument. It's not worth it. Let's just stop here. And I feel very validated with a lot of things you've said, but I've made so many notes which I really will look into it.
Yeah,
So thank
let
you.
me piggyback on that, because our typical client is going to be the caregiver, right? That's the person who's coming into coaching or therapy. That is the, I'm going to use loose language here, but the good child is going to come into coaching or therapy. The difficult child, the difficult sibling, is probably not coming into coaching or therapy. So we're going to be dealing with the caregiver, who most often has to announce to the people around her, please do more. I'm doing lots. You guys need to do more. And so I think that's a typical interaction for me anyway in coaching, is that the person I'm working with, for the sake of living her life purposes, not just to reduce her stress or to reduce her anxiety, but so that she can get her novel written or whatever she's attempting to do. In order for her to live her life purposes, she has to deal with her aging dad less. She needs other people to step up. So when you paint a picture of a life, when you paint a picture to a client of how life could hang together better for her if she got out of that conflict and focused on her life purposes, then she might, so to speak, buy the cell phone herself. She would acquiesce, but she wouldn't be acquiescing. She'd be deciding to live her other life purposes. She wants to get her life in order. And if that means buying the cell phone, that's what it means.
Thank you.
Carol.
So, Eric, at one point you said, saying things in simple terms, and you gave the example of, please stop doing that. And I really recoiled, because I don't like people to say something like that to me. And I feel like in conflicts, other people think what is wrong is very obvious, and that obviously you're the one who's wrong. And I feel like it also goes against the grain, because it's not doing the I statement, like, I'm so uncomfortable when you do blank, I think is better than, please stop doing that.
Yeah, I think it's contextual. I hear you. I think it's contextual. If it's a conversation between two people who are, to use loose language, trying to get to yes, then yeah, that would be too abrupt and inappropriate. But if it's something that you say to a battering husband, you don't want to say a lot of words. There it's, stop that, or I'm going to the police. So it's contextual. I think, painting a picture of where somebody really had to say something to feel safe or to take care of her life, so to speak. But I agree with you that in other situations, in other contexts, that would be too abrupt and not the right way to go.
Okay, thank you. Who else would like to ask Eric a question? Cynthia. If you would unmute, please.
Good
Thank you.
evening. I'm going to ask kind of a personal question about something that I do with my friends. I have this thing, when I get to know friends, when I have like a social life, I get to know my friends really well. I understand their backgrounds, their character, so that if I ever face a problem with them, or if, like, for example, I have this friend, we gave birth to our boys at the same time. So she always had this thing where she compared my child to hers. My child can talk before yours, my child can stand before. It doesn't show as if she's like jealous or anything, but she always has to make it a point to compare her kids to other people's kids. Or, for example, I have another friend, like, if I'm working, if I have a job, she always notes that, don't leave your job. It's very important to stay in your job, because you don't have to stay home or whatever. If I leave my job, she says, why did you do that? You have to stay at work, and stuff like that. It's always like, whatever I do, it's not good enough, or it's not satisfying enough for them. I understand their character, so I don't talk about these issues that they have with me, for example, because I don't like to have a conflict with them. People always tell me, you need to tell them that there are boundaries, that they're annoying you. They don't annoy me because I know where they're coming from. I know why they're comparing my kid, why she's comparing my kids to hers, or why, for example, things that I do might like let people try to feel that they're superior to me. So they don't annoy me. Is that something that bad, that I don't get affected by these people?
Again, I think it's contextual in the following sense. If any of these people were your intimate other, your partner, this probably wouldn't work so well. You would probably feel demeaned or irritated or judged or something too much. So it matters that these are friends rather than the person you live with, your mate. With friends, since you say you're not being annoyed, I don't think there's a problem here particularly. That is, you can't change them. We probably understand that were you to bring it up, it might lead to a rupture in the friendship. They would feel judged or criticized or this or that. So if you're wanting them to be your friends, I think you're doing exactly what you need to do, which is take it with a grain of salt, as long as it's not emotionally disturbing you. I mean, I'm hearing you say that it's sort of okay, that it's not a big problem, so let's let it not be a big problem. However, were it an intimate other, I think it would be a big problem.
Yeah.
And then you would have to say to that person, you'd have to find the strength to say to that person, it's not okay to tell me I need to change my job. That isn't okay. Or whatever your other examples were. It's not okay to say that to me. It's not okay to compare little Bobby to little Johnny. It's not okay.
Yes.
So
Thank you very much.
the situation you describe, I think you've worked it out really. All of our friends are going to come with shadows and warts, all of them.
Yes.
So that your friends come with these particular shadows and warts, so be it.
Yeah, good question. And you've chosen to be friends with them. And it doesn't matter what other people think. You're comfortable and you've got your boundaries. If they're crossed, you know what to do.
That's right. And comfortable enough, I would say. I think on a given day, maybe you don't want to see Jane or you don't want to see Barbara because you don't want to be told something. You don't want to be criticized. So again,
Mm.
it's important to set boundaries. It's not like you are forced to deal with them at all times on their in the ways in which they want to deal with you. You get to decide how you want to deal with them. So you do need to bring strength even to this sort of relationship.
Thank you. Who else? Who would like to go next? Personal, French, or professional conflict that they would like Eric's input while we've got him in the hot seat.
It's actually a little chilly.
Chilly. You need a hot water bottle on your lap then, Eric.
No, I need my knit cap, which I don't wear on Zoom calls.
Okay, so as I can't see anybody raising their hand, what I'm going to suggest is we just take a minute, 60 seconds, to either jot some things down, either in the chat box or on your CPD log, your continual professional development log, rather than leaving it to the end of the week thinking, what did I get out of the book I read, the masterclass I went on, etc. Do it now. What are the key takeaways in terms of what you've learned, what you will do differently as a result of investing this time with Eric this evening? And that may or may not prompt a question. So 60 seconds starting now. Okay. So one final check before we let Eric enjoy the rest of his day. Anything come up for anybody? And if not, as you can see, yes, Teresa?
Oh my God. I have my last session with a coaching client today. And what you said, it's the good child that goes to coaching or therapy. I can see that so with her, and I'm going to use that tonight. And I thought, oh my God, there is so much depth in that. Yeah, it's the people who really want to change. And if we just put all the energy in, but we never challenge the people who we go, the reason we have these inner conflicts as well with ourselves, maybe, that is not gonna work. So we either then have to challenge them, or like you said, just move away. That's what I did, or reduce the contact. But there is a really deep thing. Something is deep in there to think, yeah, the person that's often causing the conflict, they're never in therapy or coaching. That is such a good point. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Teresa. That was an aha moment for me as well, actually, that it's the person who wants to change, who is, as you said, Eric, the good person, not the difficult person, because they probably think they're fine as they are, so they don't come to coaching or therapy. Okay, thank you everybody for your support, your questions, your interest, and thank you, Eric, as usual. As I say, you're an incredibly generously kind-hearted person. We love spending time with you, and I know that you've got your book, The Coach's Way, coming out in April, I think it is. Is that right?
Correct. That's right.
So that will be packed with information for the coaches on the call to further improve their skills. And then in July, or maybe it's June, you've got a 11 chapter series. In fact, I think it's that book, isn't it, where you're bringing the book to life in super short, laser focused masterclasses, and Julie is going to be the host, but that will all be promoted in the IAPC&M as usual.
Sounds good. See you all then, and
thanks
for visiting, and off we go.
Yeah, stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.